니지 침보세디 안 지금 뭐가 간데 힘바다 디니기 셈 개발제 아니 셈 상반은 탐지기 조 디네레스 연된디기 바슈.
Good afternoon. So this morning we spoke about great compassion, what this remarkable mind is, this deep yearning for all beings to gain freedom from suffering. We spoke thereafter about that in order to actually generate great compassion and all the subsequent excellent qualities of the Mahayana, one needs to first prepare one's mind through the preliminary practices. And this is the first of the 7 points. But prior to starting one's session, one's meditation practice, one needs to cultivate or engage in the 6 types of preparatory practices. So we looked at the 6 types of preparatory practices, and thereafter we started to look at the preliminaries. And the preliminaries start with precious human rebirth and the impermanence of this life. This morning we started to look at the preliminary practices. And as mentioned, the first is that of precious human rebirth. So this is an incredibly important practice to train in, because we take this life we have for granted. We see it as ordinary, as commonplace. We do not yet recognize just what an incredible rebirth or incredible opportunity this rebirth brings. The presentation is usually presented through the 18 freedoms and endowments. By reflecting on these, one comes to recognize just what one has achieved. One also reflects on their great rarity and the difficulty in achieving them. And this then we come to see how fortunate we are. When we compare ourselves to beings in other realms, for example, animals, we see what an outstanding opportunity a precious human rebirth brings. For example, animals, whilst they have various qualities, and maybe in terms of their physical senses, they have qualities humans lack. But in terms of their intelligence, they are greatly impeded. Animals lack the capacity to come to recognize the causes for their suffering and the causes for happiness, and how to abandon the deeper causes of suffering and accumulate the causes for happiness. They do not have the intelligence for that. But what makes this human rebirth so remarkable, well, there are a number of points, but one is this incredible human intelligence. It really, that and other qualities of a precious human rebirth make this opportunity we have quite outstanding. So this reflection then leads us to recognize what we've achieved, not to take it for granted, to no longer see it as commonplace. And therefore, we come to recognize that now I have an opportunity whereby I can accumulate the causes for liberation and enlightenment. What a shame it would be if I do not utilize what remains of this life well, this life which is impermanent, which is going to come to an end, as there are so many reasons that can bring about the end of our life. Therefore, I must utilize what remains well, utilize it to accumulate causes for liberation and enlightenment. Precious human rebirth and its impermanence, these are particularly important preliminary practices, and they need to be cultivated within so that they have a lasting impact on our way of thinking, on what we value and where we put our energy. We can perhaps group those 2 preliminaries as one, and then we can have a second preliminary thinking about the true sufferings and true origins, or the truth of suffering and the truth of origin. So if we divide the preliminaries in 2, the first leads us to recognize this incredible opportunity we have, and that we need to embrace it, make the most of it right now. That's the first. And the second, we come to look with honest eyes at our situation, recognizing whilst this life is of great value, we are constantly, it's as if we're walking along a precipice where we could at any moment fall into suffering, in that overt suffering may befall us at any time. And we know this from our own lived experience, right, in terms of ourselves, as well as what we observe, that suddenly things can go very wrong. perhaps a severe illness is diagnosed, or some other kind of financial or family disaster befalls us, it's always the state of potential disaster seems to hover about us. At the outset of looking at suffering, I want to say that it is commonplace not to want to hear about this, certainly not to think about this, because no one wants to suffer. We don't even want to hear about it. So whilst this is a common reaction, one unfortunately needs to come to recognize suffering. So on one hand, I want to acknowledge that it's completely normal not to want to hear about suffering, think about suffering, because no one wants to experience suffering. But if we take an illustration that you may well be familiar with through people that you know, someone who's maybe complains that they're not feeling well, but insists they don't have time to go and see a doctor. And they may well just endure the sickness for years. So they know something's wrong. They're having difficulty moving. They're having some pains. Something is up with their body. But they make excuse after excuse not to go and see a medical practitioner. But in the end, when they can no longer function and they have to go, by the time they then get to see a medical professional, it may well be too late for anything to be done. And I imagine for people in such a situation, I imagine all of them regret not having faced up to the reality of their situation when they first became aware of their symptoms. I doubt any of them are rejoicing that they had never sought out medical treatment, in particular, now that they recognize that back in the past, if they followed the course of medical treatment, their illness could have easily been healed. But now it is too late. So if we take an illustration like that, it makes it very clear the great benefit that comes to recognizing suffering early on, so that there is time to do something about it, rather than just ignoring the reality of one's situation. So if one does not want to think about suffering, one will not come to recognize one is suffering. And if one does not recognize that one is suffering, one will have no interest in learning about what can be done to alleviate suffering. And if one is forced to hear, one will not apply it. So therefore, it is imperative that one comes to know suffering, recognize suffering. And this is why when Buddha Shakyamuni taught the Four Noble Truths in Varanasi, the first noble truth, the truth of suffering, the Buddha taught this is to be known, this is to be recognized, as from this recognition, one's determination to engage in the Dharma will arise. Meditation on suffering, in the meditation on suffering, one will often start and should start at the easily recognizable levels of suffering. Here we think particularly of the suffering of physical and mental pain. This is something we all have experience of, and go to deeper levels based on that, or starting there, then go to deeper levels, recognizing the uncertainty in our life, whereby things unexpectedly befall us. The unknown or things that we do not expect all too often befall us. And also that there is no stability in the sense of this life is finite. So every newborn will live, let's say, a maximum of about 100 years. Those of us who are now well into that period, we can say with certainty that we have at most some decades left, and then this life will end. And where we need to get further with this meditation is to recognize that when death comes, like with every single life before, it will be followed by a new rebirth. And in this new rebirth, suffering too will befall us. We do not have control. We do not have, it's not within our own choice what kind of situation we will be born in, what kind of rebirth and situation within that. And here the recognition needs to come to see. We need to come to the recognition of being helpless in this process of circling in cyclic existence. And that we are circling in cyclic existence means that we continue to have these physical and mental aggregates, and therefore life after life, we continue to just replace or update these aggregates as this body and mind. But this is something that is not done in our control, but comes about independent on the karma we've created. So the preliminaries, if we divide them into these two parts, the two that I mentioned this morning, the precious human rebirth and its impermanence, this is the purpose there is to come to recognize it. So this is a very positive, uplifting recognition of what we've achieved, this incredible opportunity, and the need to embrace it, to make the most of it now. So to challenge our mistaken view that this life is commonplace, is ordinary, and that we have time. So that's the first preliminary. The second one now, this brings us a bit down to earth, you could say, in that we are needing to here look at the faults of our situation, what is wrong with this situation, that we are, because we are caught or bound in this process of circling in cyclic existence, that we need to recognize that we will continue to experience suffering rebirth after suffering rebirth unless we do something about it. So the reason I'm dividing these preliminaries in these two ways, that of recognizing what we have and then coming to see that it is though bound in suffering, is so that we can come to see the reality of our situation in a balanced manner. And within this, we need to also recognize that the situation we are in has come about not causelessly, not created by something or someone, but it has come about independent on causes and conditions. So this means our aggregates, our body and our mind, has come about independent on causes and conditions. That we remain bound in cyclic existence is due to causes and conditions. This recognition is of great importance. So within the second reflection, in the preliminaries on coming to recognize our situation, we first reflect on true sufferings, recognizing that wherever we are in cyclic existence, in samsara, we are subject to suffering. As long as we are bound within samsara, we are subject to suffering. Therefore, our physical and mental aggregates, they have no abiding value. This then leads us to seek out the causes for our situation. This is the second noble truth, that of true origins. And the causes of why we suffer are contaminated karma and afflictions. So this term afflictions refers to when the mind is afflicted. And there are many illustrations, such as attachment, such as anger, such as pride and jealousy, and so forth. These are minds that are afflicted, and it's from these we accumulate karma that keeps us bound in the suffering realms of samsara. So here where we're looking at true sufferings and true origins, so the second grouping of the preliminaries, we need to come to recognize clearly what is meant by suffering and why we suffer in this way, which is due to contaminated karma and afflictions. And of those two, it's really the afflictions that are the primary cause of why we suffer. Because when a being who is without afflictions will not suffer, it's these afflicted minds that cause all suffering. Every suffering experience we've ever had is due to our afflictions. The ripening of this karma is ripened due to the presence of afflictions. It was accumulated under the influence of the afflictions. And right now, in this life, whilst it is a remarkable opportunity, we suffer because of these afflictions. And through these afflictions, we are creating causes that will lead to further suffering in our next rebirth. Here, the reflection here on the two truths, these first two of the Four Noble Truths, true sufferings and true origins, needs to lead us firstly to a sense of disenchantment, a sense of weariness with this constant process that we have been enduring for lifetime after lifetime, and it will just continue like this. This then leads us to a wish to bring this to an end, to break this wheel of suffering, to attain liberation from the suffering realms of samsara, or to attain freedom from the suffering realms of samsara. This is then the second key outcome. The first is this mind of wariness with the situation, and the second is the determination to emerge from these suffering realms of samsara, to gain liberation or freedom from suffering. This then is the outcome of the second group of preliminaries, and is key for the generation of bodhicitta and the wisdom realizing emptiness. So these preliminary practices are the way one prepares the foundation of one's mind so that it is suitable to generate bodhicitta and the wisdom realizing emptiness. So where one needs to come to here is this recognition: I have to abandon my afflictions. Our lives, our body, experience through our body and our mind, is naturally subject to suffering. And the reason for this, or the cause for this, is our afflictions. If the afflictions are abandoned, one will not suffer. The reason I suffer is because the afflictions have not been abandoned. And what are the afflictions? Well, their consciousness, their mind, which means that the reason we suffer is not another person, it's not a place, it's nothing material. It is mental, our way of thinking. Therefore, the solution too is to transform our way of thinking. This means we need to cultivate an opposing way of thinking, a way of thinking that is contrary to the afflictions. And this is the meaning of cultivating paths which lead to the goal of enlightenment, mental paths. A key point here is the recognition that the cause of our suffering and the cause of our liberation lies within. It lies within our mind, comes about through transforming our mind. The afflictions have many guises. There's the afflictions of anger, and this term anger, I always understand it as having a very broad expression, from frustration and annoyance all the way up to rage and hatred, is all encompassed together under anger. Attachment too has a wide variety in terms of its strength, as well as other afflictions such as pride, jealousy, and so forth. Amongst these afflictions, anger is the one that's easiest to recognize, in particular easiest to recognize in terms of it being harmful. Because whenever one's mind is angry, again, whether it's at the level of frustrated or annoyed, or if it's at the other extreme of rage and hatred, it's clear we are unhappy. Any peace of mind before we exploded within, any peace of mind we had, is entirely destroyed. And if we express our anger, this unhappiness we feel arises in the mind of others too. In other words, when we express our anger, we make others unhappy too. So anger, it's very easy to see the faults of it. The others can be a bit more, one needs to look a bit more carefully. Attachment, though, the way we see attachment, with the way we can see very easily that attachment brings harm, is when we are attached to things going our own way. When we get insistent, I want this, we must all do it in this way. This insisting leads to us to dismiss the needs of others. So when our mind is closed and narrow like that, we are not open and embracing of others. In fact, we are dismissive towards them. And furthermore, we need to come to recognize that it's through these afflictions that we accumulate non-virtuous karma. Through their mere presence, through our mind becoming ever more habituated to the afflictions, or when we speak or physically act under their influence, we accumulate karma, non-virtuous karma, which will ripen in our future suffering. So in this way, we come to understand true origins, the origin of our suffering. And furthermore, when we go through this process of investigating our afflictions, we need to come to recognize that whilst the afflictions arise in many different forms, they all arise from one root cause, the ignorance of self-grasping. So this we can experience in that the center of all our thoughts is the I, is myself. I want to be happy. I want this. I don't want this. I like this. I dislike that. We are at the center of all our thoughts, the center of our universe. This ignorance of self-grasping is the origin of all our afflictions, therefore the origin of all our suffering. So when the mind is quiet, recall a time when you got angry. And again, this word anger, you can recall a time when you got annoyed, or when full-blown rage erupted, because they're all encompassed under the same banner. So you need to do this reflection when the mind is calm, when it's unafflicted. It's a little hard when one is enraged. But when you're unafflicted, recall a time you're angry, and you just ask, why was I angry? What set me off? And so immediately we'll be turned to an event. But prior to that, between the event and us getting angry, one's mind became unhappy. So we became angry. Prior to becoming angry, our mind was discontent, unhappy, and that came from something else. So there's this stream. And that something else may have been something you've seen, something you heard, or something you thought of. For example, if there's someone that you deeply dislike, seeing them will make the mind unhappy and anger arises. Again, it could just be a frustration, annoyance, and aversion, a pulling away. Or hearing their voice. You haven't yet seen them, but you know they are in the vicinity. This too can make the mind unhappy and anger arise. Or merely thinking of them. They're nowhere around, they may not even still be alive, but you think of them, and emotion arises. The mind becomes unhappy, the mind is angry, then becomes angry. So what we see here is that in each of these instances, in each of these examples, something that was happening was not in accordance with my wishes. So I saw or heard or thought of someone I dislike. And from hearing or seeing or thinking of someone I dislike, the mind became unhappy and anger arose. So therefore, anger arises from the mind being unhappy, which arises from encountering something, and beneath that is I. I dislike this. So in this way, at the very heart of, or the very basis of the stream that led to anger is I. And this then is the ignorance of self-grasping. And this is, so anger is easier to recognize, but it's like this with all the afflictions. Take attachment. So when one's attached to something, it's because one is desires it is the same word, when one sees it as something that one wants. So right at the heart of this, of I wanting, is this I want. This too then is an illustration of the ignorance of self-grasping that is at the heart of the stream leading to attachment. In this way we come to recognize that whilst it's afflictions that keep us bound in samsara, that cause all our suffering, the afflictions have a root cause, the ignorance of self-grasping. And it's this root cause that when it's abandoned, one gains liberation from suffering, freedom from suffering. Therefore, it's the ignorance of self-grasping that needs to be abandoned. So let's talk about coming to recognize the ignorance of self-grasping. Because this is being the root cause of our suffering, it's imperative we come to see what this root cause is so we know what it is we need to abandon. So one first and quite easily recognizes that at the heart of all our thoughts tends to be I. So I am listening, I am sitting, I am a bit bored, I am engaged, I am hungry, I am tired, whatever it is. There's always this I at the center of our individual universes. So the question then is, how does this I appear to us? And here we really need to think, because this is not something we have necessarily thought about before, but nevertheless, it constantly arises, therefore, we take it for granted. It's quite hidden to us, so we need to look. So one way that it does appear is as if it is something separate, I'm using synonyms, separate, unrelated, independent from the aggregates being the body and the mind. So our I, who we are, appears to be something that exists, but it's something other than our body, other than our mind. Something that is unchanging. This I, this who I have been throughout my life and who I imagine I was in the past and will be in the future, there's something that hasn't changed and is not dependent on my body, not dependent on my mind. So this is what appears to us. It's a bit hidden to us in the sense that we haven't looked for it, but this is what appears to us. This is the way we believe we exist. And then we grasp at it. So grasp is the way the mind engages with it. We grasp at it as true, or to use synonyms to explain this word true in true grasping. We grasp at it as being true, as being real, as being reality. In other words, this is how the self truly exists, really exists in reality, and we grasp at it. So this is something that we naturally do, that's innate true grasping. And this is the ignorance of self-grasping. So just another word being used, true grasping, self-grasping, the ignorance of self-grasping, that is the root cause of all our suffering. So we look in the first of the 7 points, and the first is the preliminary practices, and I've divided into 2. We looked briefly at the first, and now we're looking at the second. And the second is we're looking at true sufferings and true origins. The reflections on suffering and the origin of suffering, why it is that we suffer, what the causes of our suffering are, leads to a determination to emerge from suffering, to gain freedom from suffering. So this we'll know from the Lamaram as being part of the trainings shared with the practitioner of intermediate capacity. And it is the second of the preliminary practices identified here. The second of the preliminary practices that are required to generate later bodhicitta and the wisdom realizing emptiness. So why is it that the meditation on true suffering and true origins is said to be a preliminary to generating compassion? Why is it said to be indispensable for the cultivation of compassion? So the reason is, none of us want to suffer. What we do, everything we say, do, or think, is to attain happiness and freedom from suffering. But without really knowing the causes of our suffering and knowing the expanse of ways that suffering are experienced, we will not be able to give rise to a wish for freedom from suffering or to truly, wholeheartedly engage in cultivation of those causes. So we have to know what is meant by suffering and where it comes from, so as to give rise to a determination to gain freedom from suffering. This then is that indispensable foundation for the generation of compassion, because we then, having given rise to, you could call it here, self-compassion, compassion in relation to oneself, you then apply it to others, because you understand why they are suffering and how they can gain freedom. Otherwise, one's generation of compassion towards others is only in relation to superficial suffering, and the prescribed solutions are also equally superficial. So therefore, it's not the actual compassion that will lead to bodhicitta. One needs to understand suffering and its origins in relation to oneself, so that one has the determined attitude to gain freedom, so that one then can lift that determined attitude and apply it to others, to become determined to guide others for freedom. An analogy that hopefully will make it clear is, let's say you see food and it's written on the menu that it's got chili. If you've never eaten chili, you have no idea what it tastes like. When you taste it for the first time, then you will know. And then, based on this experience and knowledge, you will be able to tell others what chili tastes like. When you see food has chili in it, you'll know whether to eat it or avoid it. This all comes about from knowledge and experience. So too here, when one understands the workings of one's own mind well, when one understands why one suffers and how to gain freedom, then easily and genuinely one can apply that to others. We're looking at the second of the 7 points, the main practice, training in the 2 bodhicittas. So bodhicitta can be divided into 2. One of the ways is what's referred to here, that of ultimate bodhicitta and conventional bodhicitta. Conventional bodhicitta is usually what we hear about when we hear about bodhicitta. Bodhicitta is this mind that is determined to lead all beings to attain liberation from suffering. And secondly, in order to do so, I will become a Buddha. So the commitment to become a Buddha in order to lead all beings to a state freed from suffering. This is usually what we hear about in terms of bodhicitta, and this is conventional bodhicitta. When conventional bodhicitta is in the mind of an Arya bodhisattva, a bodhisattva who has realized emptiness directly, that conventional bodhicitta is then suitable to be called ultimate bodhicitta, because it is in the continuum of an Arya bodhisattva. So both bodhicittas are presented here, training in the 2 bodhicittas. And why both? Because one requires to cultivate both in order to achieve the objective of bodhicitta, to become a Buddha for the sake of others. One bodhicitta, or only conventional bodhicitta, cannot lead to the attainment of Buddhahood, and ultimate bodhicitta cannot be generated without the prior generation of conventional bodhicitta, hence the need to train in both. Of the 2, they are developed in a definite, in a set sequence. Always, conventional bodhicitta is generated prior to ultimate bodhicitta. An analogy that's often used to make this point that both bodhicittas are needed is that for a bird to fly to its destination, it needs 2 wings. It will not get very far if one wing is undeveloped or broken. So the bodhisattva, in order to fulfill the aspiration of becoming a Buddha for the sake of all beings, needs to cultivate both wings. So if a practitioner is particularly drawn to one of the 2 trainings, bodhicitta or the wisdom realizing emptiness, they need to recognize this and ensure that they do train in both. Because if one only cultivates a wisdom realizing emptiness, Buddhahood cannot be achieved. If one only cultivates bodhicitta, Buddhahood cannot be achieved. Both have to be cultivated in order to become a Buddha. So of the 2 types of bodhicitta, ultimate bodhicitta, to generate ultimate bodhicitta, emptiness has to be realized directly. To generate conventional bodhicitta, prior to that, one has to generate bodhicitta. So again, to develop ultimate bodhicitta, one has to first realize emptiness directly. To develop conventional bodhicitta, one has to cultivate love and compassion and generate bodhicitta. And then one develops conventional bodhicitta. So now looking at the second point, the main practice, training in the 2 bodhicittas, and reading the first 4 together. Consider all phenomena as being like a dream. Analyze the nature of consciousness that is without beginning. The antidote itself will also be liberated in its own nature. Abide in the essence of the state of emptiness, the basis of all. So, as I just said, to develop ultimate bodhicitta, one has to realize emptiness directly. To realize emptiness directly, one has to first realize emptiness. So there's a sequence to train in. So one needs to realize emptiness before one gets to realize emptiness directly. So there are many commentaries to this text, the 7-point Mahayana mind training, and some say that one should first train in compassion, then cultivate the wisdom realizing emptiness, and others the wisdom realizing emptiness and then compassion. So I make this point because you may read different things in different places. So some will say, so just to repeat, some will say that one should first train in bodhicitta and then cultivate the wisdom realizing emptiness. Others will say you should first train in the wisdom realizing emptiness and then bodhicitta. Both are, clearly there is a difference. neither is mistaken. Comes down to the individual. Some are more inclined to one than the other, and therefore they would be more suited to train in one and then the other. So some are more inclined to train in bodhicitta and thereafter the wisdom realizing emptiness, or to cultivate the wisdom realizing emptiness, whereas others are more inclined to cultivate the wisdom realizing emptiness and thereafter bodhicitta. So therefore, both approaches, whilst they are different, neither is mistaken. It depends on the individual, their own disposition and inclination. So therefore, again, both approaches, whilst different, are unmistaken. Some will be more inclined to apply themselves to cultivate compassion. When compassion is generated, they will then cultivate the wisdom realizing emptiness whilst maintaining their compassion. Others will take the opposite approach, and they'll first focus on cultivating the wisdom realizing emptiness. When that is sufficiently cultivated, they will then focus on cultivating compassion, again, whilst maintaining the wisdom realizing emptiness. So looking at the first subpoint here, consider all phenomena as being like a dream. So to explain this in a general manner, like a surface level, what it means is that the way that things appear to us, they do not necessarily exist in that way, or they do not exist in that way. In fact, the way they appear is not so different from a dream, in that in a dream, let's say one dreams of a house or a building, that house appears to our mind as being a house. But when we wake up, we realize, of course, it wasn't a house, it was a dream. So this refers to consider all phenomena as being like a dream in that sense. Then relating this to what we were hearing at the preliminaries. So there we saw that the origin of all our suffering is the ignorance of self-grasping, or the ignorance of true grasping. So this relates to the self, that we believe it to exist in a particular way. And so the way it appears to us, we believe it to be true, and then we grasp at that true grasping. And this true grasping, which is an ignorance, is the root cause of all our suffering. So that's what we've looked at. Now this first point, consider all phenomena, so like the self, as being like a dream. So that the way the self appears as being the way the self appears, and then we believe that appearance to be true and we grasp at it, that ignorance, that is a mind of ignorance, because the self does not exist in the way that it appears. It is rather empty of existing in the way that it appears. Here one uses this first point to come to understand that all phenomena, the way they appear, is not how they exist. In this way, by using our mind to do analysis, we come to cultivate the wisdom understanding emptiness, which is the mind coming to understand the ultimate reality. And in this way, by coming to understand emptiness, one abandons eventually the ignorance of self-grasping. It's the only method to abandon the root cause of our suffering, the ignorance of self-grasping, is the realization of emptiness. It is the only method, and it is, of course, a mental approach done through analysis, coming to understand emptiness. Here we need to look at two aspects: the consciousness that apprehends and what it apprehends. So there is the apprehended object, so whatever it is the mind is engaging with is an object, and then the consciousness, the mind, that is doing the engaging. So there are these two components here. It comes down to no phenomenon, so nothing that exists in the way that it appears, but is rather empty of existing in the way that it appears. These two words, all phenomena, this we should understand very broadly, in that everything that our mind engages with, so something we see, the flower, this room, something we think about, say a person, whatever it may be, it appears as if it is self-existent. It exists from its own side or by way of its own nature or essence. everything appears to our mind to exist in this way, but actually it does not. It does not exist in the way that it appears to our mind. The way that appears to our mind, self-existent, existing by way of its own nature or essence, is as if it is not dependent on causes and conditions, but rather just exists as it does from its own side, by way of its own nature. But in reality, it does not exist in this way. Rather, it exists dependent on causes and conditions. So this first line, whilst it refers to all phenomena, so everything should be related to as being like a dream. In meditation, it's encouraged that one should, in terms of all phenomena, start with the I, the self. Come to see how does it appear. In the way that it appears to us, the innate or natural way that it appears to us, is as if it exists from its own side, it's self-existent. Or it exists by way of its own nature or essence. There's something that makes the self, that makes me, me. And then, so this is the first step, is to come to actually see how it appears, to recognize how it appears. Then the second step is the process of analysis or investigation, where we ask ourselves, does it exist in the way that it appears or not? So this is now the analytical meditation on reality, and it is the second step to see if the self, the I, exists in the way that it appears or not. The first step was to try and recognize how the I appears. So the way the self appears as if it is independent or not dependent on anything at all, not independent of anything at all, and in particular in relation to our aggregates. So it appears as if it's something separate, not dependent on our body or our mind. So this is how the self appears. And so using this word of not dependent or independent indicates that here, when we engage in the second step, that of investigation, we'll do so by means of dependent arising. So the first step is to see how the self, the I, appears to the mind. And this it appears as if having the characteristic of having been unchanging, this abiding essence or nature that is me, that has been existent throughout this lifetime and lifetimes previous and lifetimes to come. And that this unchanging entity is also independent of body and mind. The body and mind changes, but this self is unchanging. So this is the way it appears. This is the first step, to recognize this. The second then is to investigate, to see if this is the case or not. We'll all say right now, I am sitting. And if we think back, we'll say, I came here. And in a little while, I will go from here. And saying that is certainly correct. But the only reason one can say this validly is because the body was doing something. The physical aggregate was doing something. The only reason you can say, I am sitting, is because your body is in a position of being seated. And later, when you stand up, you can say, I am standing. And the only reason you can say that is because of the posture of the body. So what this points out is that there is a relationship between the I and what the physical aggregate, the body, is doing. And this is contrary, though, to how the I appears. The I appears as if it is something separate, unrelated, not dependent on the body. So here we recognize that the way the I appears is not how it exists, because we see a contradiction. And that, in fact, the I and the aggregates are of the same essence. They are indivisible. They are interdependent. So, in brief, the first step, how the I appears. The second step, does it exist in the way it appears or not? And we recognize that the way it appears is as if the I is something separate, distinct from, unrelated to the aggregates. It's something that's unchanged throughout this life, although the body and mind have changed so much. But in reality, it is not so. It is in fact deeply entwined. It is it's indivisible, of the same entity, of the same essence, interdependent. So in this way, we come to recognize that the way that the self appears is not the way it exists. The meditation just done in relation to the physical aggregate, the body, we thereafter do in relation to the mental aggregates, the mind. So if we take the aggregate of feeling, so how are you feeling now? So let's say you're feeling happy, as opposed to happy or unhappy. Let's say you're feeling happy. The only reason you can validly make the statement, I am happy, is because there is a relationship between the way that one feels and the self. That therefore, despite the self appearing as if it is independent, separate, distinct from the mental aggregates, in fact, it is interdependent with the mental aggregates. Likewise, if one's not happy, if one's in a bad mood, clearly, then when one is, I am unhappy, this is because one's mind is unhappy. Therefore, despite the self appearing to be independent, it is in fact dependent. And we put the two together. The only reason I can validly say, I am sitting and I am happy, is independence on my aggregates, dependence on my body and mind. Therefore, the self and aggregates are mutually dependent, despite the self appearing as being independent of the body and mind, of the aggregates. Therefore, we come to recognize a contradiction, that the I does not exist in the way that it appears. So this very brief introduction to the meditation on emptiness is of great importance. So bear it in mind, especially if you've heard teachings such as this before, then do these reflections, because it does become much clearer over time. By hearing teachings a lot, reflecting on them a lot, then how the self and other phenomena appear becomes clearer. Thereby, the process of analysis starts to have more of an impact. And this, again, is incredibly important, because this is the method by which the afflictions are abandoned and one gains freedom from suffering. It is the method, the only method. And it becomes easier with time. So fortunately, tomorrow we'll continue from here and continue with this presentation. So we'll conclude there then for this afternoon. Just conclude with a brief story from the great Milarepa. A student of his came to see him and asked, can you please give me a Dharma teaching? And Milarepa looked at him and said, who's asking this question? Who are you? Go away, come back tomorrow and tell me who's asking this question, who you are. So the student returned to their residence and engaged in meditation in precisely the way that I've introduced you to tonight, or today, and returned to see Milarepa the next day. And Milarepa again said, who are you? Who's asking this question? Who's asking for a teaching? And the student said, I followed your advice and I looked for myself, but I couldn't find myself anywhere. And Milarepa said, excellent. That is your teaching. Continue to look for yourself and continue not to find yourself. So we've had a very brief introduction to this, and we'll continue to look at it more. But it's of great importance, because this is the route, the method by which freedom is attained.
Indeed, you wish to.
A question somewhere? Andy?
So, a very quick question. I just want to check my understanding, because you said earlier that ultimate bodhicitta is bodhicitta in the mind of an bodhisattva. I always thought that ultimate bodhicitta was the realization of emptiness in the mind of an bodhisattva.
So ultimate bodhicitta is the wisdom directly realizing emptiness in the continuum of an Arya Bodhisattva. Okay?
Tsepa.
Tsepa?
Mine was the same question.
Oh, good, good. So then apologies for not, as a translator, not saying it correctly, not even clearly, correctly. Oh, Lama?
When we, I've been trying to do that analysis that another junior, which says the aggregates are not self, they're not in it, they're not separate from it, etc. Is it okay, or is it enough just to leave it at the conclusion of it is dependent? Like, like you come out of that meditation, is it enough just to say it's dependent?
So when I've been doing the meditation, looking for the self, is it sufficient then in conclusion to come to the point of the self is dependent, not independent? Okay. Yes, this is suitable to come to recognize that the self doesn't exist in the way that it appears, which is as independent, but is actually dependent. So yes, that is sufficient. Yeah. And on this side?
And then?
Okay.
That's a bit of a linguistic question which you don't have to answer now, but I'll just throw it in anyway, because I'm a translator by profession as well. So I'm wondering what the word in Tibetan is when you say empty or emptiness. And I'm wondering if maybe in Tibetan there's a emptiness sort of means not, like it's a negation, something. There might be an expression in Tibetan or way of saying this is empty, but now in English we would just say it's not like that. That just throwing that in.
The word emptiness or empty works the same as in Tibetan, so that can be used in a regular sense of the cup is empty of tea. And so it means, and it is a negation. And there are two types of negations, and the type it is a non-affirming negation. It doesn't imply anything else. It means something is completely lacking. So it's empty of it, it's just not there. So the meaning in English actually here does match the Tibetan. In many other cases it doesn't, but this one it does. So there's, kind of was saying, now there's a difference between empty and emptiness. So tumpa, tumpani. So empty, which means something just is not there. So the cup is empty of tea. But emptiness is more specific. It follows an analysis where what you are looking for is not found. So this, in this case, in inherent existence, true existence, one is seeking this and does not find it. But one, through that understanding, one then goes on to a further understanding. So to use the same words as Venerable Lobsang used, when you look to see whether something is self-existent or independent, you come to recognize it is not independent, it's empty of being independent, but through that you recognize it is dependent. Okay. Then thank you very much.